Hey all, here OS Reviews. A few months back, we did a review on the VANKYO MatrixPad Z10, which was a budget Android tablet selling for around 160 bucks that has a 10-inch display and pretty good specs for the money, including a full HD display and 3 gigabytes of RAM, which are actually slightly more powerful than the majority of other budget tabs in the same price. The only downside was the design of the Z10 was not very modern. In fact, the bezel size can be considered as fat on the left and right sides, definitely not a great look. However, the new S20 that we're looking at today tries to solve that issue by trimming down the bezel size. It's retailing for around $110, sometimes goes on sale for under that. It retains 3 gigabytes of RAM, which is pretty good for an entry-level budget tablet, but the screen resolution has also been slightly downsized to 720p. Aside from that, though, we are talking about a pretty good, again, overall specs to price ratio. It has, once again, a 10-inch screen just in a smaller body because of thinner bezels, has a 8-megapixel rear-facing camera with an LED flash, and retains functions like an FM radio and also built-in GPS. It's got 32 gigs of built-in storage, and otherwise we have an instruction manual inside, in addition to a charging cable and also a wall adapter. What's also been upgraded now is the ports. This is now charging using Type-C. So as the tablet here proceeds to boot up, let's peel off this screen protector. Now it is running on Android 9.0 Pie, which is pretty up to date for a budget tablet. And let's take a quick tour at the design first. Immediately we can see that the 10-inch display is pretty good. Frame of the tablet is once again constructed out of aluminum. On the top here we have a dedicated power key and volume controls, which are pretty tactile and responsive. There's also a 3.5mm headphone jack. Kind of a strange placement in my opinion, but at least we do have a standard headphone jack. The top here features a slot that covers up a micro SD card slot to expand the built-in memory, although it doesn't take a SIM card, so this is not a 4G tablet. Now it has also the modern Type-C port for charging, which is great. With that being said, charging speeds are not going to be super fast. It doesn't have Qualcomm's quick charge. It is still using a MediaTek chipset, although it is Octa-Core, to fully juice up the 6,000 milliamp hour capacity battery, which is pretty large. It actually takes around 3.5 hours, or sometimes 4 hours. The plus, though, is battery life is quite good. It will last you for around 10 hours when fully charged before you need to recharge it again, so it will definitely get you through at least a day or two before you need to pop it back in. The back here is constructed out of metal, looks quite good, just the top and bottom plates here for antenna reception are made out of plastic, and then here's the 8-megapixel camera with the LED flash. As a quick size comparison, here we have it next to the previous aforementioned VANKYO Z10 MatrixPad, the predecessor, and you can see how the new S20 is much smaller despite having the same sized screen. So really impressive there in terms of how they were able to make the dimensions feel a lot more compact. Final thing I forgot to mention is on the bottom there are stereo speakers, so it's nice that we get a set even if they aren't front facing. Alright, so taking a closer look at the UI experience, it is pretty much stock Android 9.0 with the standard setup experience when you first turn it on, and as far as apps are concerned, we get just a very clean install of just the native apps and a handful of Google apps like YouTube, Drive, Photos, Maps, things like that, and that's essentially it. So we can see that out of the memory of 32 gigabytes, we have around 23 gigs which are remaining when you first get it out of the box to fill up with your own apps, videos, things like that. In terms of additional settings, we can change the orientation of the buttons down below here, but we also don't have the ability to, for example, get rid of these in lieu of gesture controls. Although it doesn't have too many new additions or kind of custom apps or features on top of just the stock version of Android that we see here. Let's jump into a quick demo of the camera first. But the app is super bare bones, but it does work pretty well. We can actually toggle on or off HDR mode, we can turn on or off the flash, switch the orientation, and that's pretty much it. So as aforementioned, I would say it definitely is passable and works alright, again for capturing some quick snaps of documents, things like that. Now onto some more important applications of tablets, such as the web browsing performance. Let's jump into Chrome, and you can see here that loading along, things are actually pretty snappy and responsive. Same thing goes with system navigation from before. You can see how there is really not too many traces of lag as we are moving, which is quite good. The screen also feels pretty responsive, even though it's not a Corning Gorilla Glass on top. So all in all, not bad at all. Reception quality is also quite good thanks to those two plastic antenna bands. Right now we are pretty far away from the router, but we are still remaining connected to the internet without too many issues. We can also toggle between some of these things like an eye comfort mode for reading back documents, and it turns off the blue light filter, making it better on your eyes. And there's also a custom reading mode that actually turns the screen black and white, kind of like a newspaper. It's not a true e-ink panel, of course, but does get pretty close and just makes text appear more contrasty. Kind of the last function here is a smart saving mode that you can turn on or off. There's also an ultra saving mode that you can select. So with some of these modes activated, it helps the tablet actually achieve longer than normal battery life. So for our test here, I'm going to jump into The Verge and see how long it takes to load. It is a pretty complex desktop site with all the ads running. So you can see here it's actually doing decent. It's not instantaneous, but it's more than good enough for an entry-level device, and scrolling is surprisingly responsive, although as you can see here, some of the elements haven't fully caught up yet. But as I said, this is a pretty demanding page with lots of videos and ads, so I think it's doing all right. At least it does feel still quite smooth, and I can pinch in and pinch out, and everything still feels very responsive. Colors are quite contrasty and nice and vibrant, despite being a IPS display with good viewing angles, by the way, and not a AMOLED display, for instance. Again, 720p does mean that it's not the most crisp resolution or PPI in the world, especially across a 10-inch size. So if you're reading back tiny font, it definitely becomes a little bit more pixelated, and you'll notice it if you're coming from a flagship phone that has, higher PPI and a smaller screen size. But all in all, it certainly isn't bad. Looking at images, for example, still is very satisfying. So what you're able to do is switch back and forth between these tabs, and you can see here that it's still remaining opened in the RAM because it isn't refreshing or reloading itself every time that we switch between these. So again, keeping around 5 or 6 tabs running and some other apps still keeps things running pretty smoothly. Let's take a closer look at how the speakers sound. Alright, so turning the volume down there, overall takeaways is it's definitely very enjoyable for watching videos, thanks to the fact that the screen quality is quite good in terms of colors and contrast, even though it's not, again, the highest resolution. Speaker quality, though, is only average, I'd say. As far as tablets are concerned, they get okay in terms of loudness, but there's not a ton of bass or thump in the lower frequencies, which, for a thin and pretty low-cost device, it's fine, but that is something to keep in mind. Mids and highs, though, do sound reasonable, but definitely not the most dynamic sound in the world, but at least it is a stereo pair and good enough for some occasional clips on YouTube, watching some TV shows, things like that, and you can always use your own headphones or use Bluetooth wireless pairs if you prefer that. Videos, again, do load only to 720p, but it still is a pretty cinematic experience thanks to how small the bezels are. It kind of makes you feel like you're holding onto content as opposed to a device. So getting closer and closer to thin bezels. It still has a little bit on the sides, but that's kind of needed for you to hold the thing using 2 hands. It is running on Android Pie, so we can kind of go onto the home screen, and it will still play in a picture-in-picture mode, kind of floating in a box as you multitask, and things are still reasonably snappy. And it's also an opportunity for us to take a quick look at some of the wallpapers which are built on in here. They give us a fair selection which are a little bit customized and different from stock Android. Some of these are similar if you have seen VANKYO's other tablets in the past, and you also get access to standard kind of live wallpapers that comes with Android 9.0. Kind of the last thing I want to talk about would be the gaming performance. So overall, it is still kind of loading along without too many issues or complaints. Maybe some occasional drop frames here and there, but for the most part, it's doing all right, I'd say, especially considering the fact that we are running it across a, again, processor here that's not the most powerful in the world. Overall, it still is an enjoyable experience. Again, does have the regular connectivity options, including a built-in accelerometer for tilting games. For lighter titles like this, in addition to stack, puzzle-based games, it definitely does without too many issues. The display definitely adds to the immersiveness of the gaming experience, and although not the best choice for extremely heavy titles like the aforementioned PUBG or Asphalt 9, but for the majority of other games, still is very enjoyable. So that's more or less it as far as our hands-on review of the VANKYO S20 Android tablet here in 2020, a budget Android tablet that is pretty affordable, but also offers, I would say, surprisingly good usability. It's a nice alternative to other budget tablets, perhaps ones by Amazon, like the Amazon Fire 10. What this has an advantage over really is in the design. I think it's a huge improvement compared to the Z10 that we just saw a few months ago. Although the overall system specs are still about the same, I would say it's more than sufficient for getting light tasks done. Things like general UI navigation feels pretty smooth, watching back videos and browsing the web doesn't pose too big of an issue, and with 3 GB of RAM, we're still able to kind of juggle a few different games and, again, web pages in the background without noticing too much lag or significant delay. So if interested, you can check out more details in the links down below, but for now, that's been our video. Thanks for watching here at OS Reviews. That's been the VANKYO S20 budget Android tablet.